Manderley likes to hear which agents find this area. They're usually the ones who take terrorists by surprise in the field. Your brother Paul, for instance.
I'm ready, sir.
All right, carry on. Don't let it go to your head.
Your augmentations are a go. The real test comes next. Active duty.
Deus Ex, released in 2000, is a gritty cyberpunk theme RPG by Ion Storm, from what I would consider to be the golden age of PC gaming. The soundtrack features tracks composed by Alexander Brandon, Michiel Vandenbos, and Dan Gardopée. Hope I pronounced that right. And they also did music for games like Unreal and Unreal Tournament from around the same time. While the soundtrack touches many genres, I'm going to focus more on the ambient side of things. And before we jump into the breakdown, there are a few things I want to call out, just in terms of how the music was composed and where its sonic texture likely comes from. The music for Deus Ex was composed on trackers, and while I'm not going to go in depth on trackers, this is crucial to understand because these songs were seemingly composed entirely of samples, which does have implication for how things sound due to the way samples degrade as they get pitched up and down in sort of a unnatural way. The music for Deus Ex is also very gritty texture-wise. This is likely due to the way the source samples were recorded, and whether it may be by sampling directly into something like an Amiga in 8-bit, or some older, lower bit samplers like the Akai S950 or Roland S330. With these things in mind, my approach to achieve a similar sonic texture is as follows. Use all samples, emulate sampler DAC DSP to get that crusty 8-12-bit sample sound, and then finally use a tracker. Just kidding, I'm going to use Bitwig Studio. The vibe I'm going for here is something that leans very heavy into the ambient side with very minimal melody. I'm kind of picturing this playing on loop as they're exploring the city of Deus Ex, so easy to drop in and out of as a listener. The melody's present but not in your face. So my recipe to recreate something similar here is as follows. Liberal use of ambient samples and sounds, good usage of panning and automation, good seamless loops in the arrangement, and finally minimal melodies, but still there existing enough. Some type of gentle ostinato that kind of weaves in and out of the song. I've broken the track down into two core pieces. One is the ambience. This is the atmosphere, the incidentals. Think trying to create the sounds of a late night walk in some dystopian city. What would you hear? And the other piece is the music. This is the piece that we would consider more traditional music, so pads, melody, arpeggios, so on and so forth. Looking at the atmosphere first, we've built up a bed of sounds here that, again, kind of take that approach of what would you hear if you were walking around in the city of Deus Ex. And so the first sound I have here is this little craft bass sound, which comes from my Uncanny Dream sample pack. It sounds like this at the original pitch. So a nice subtle rumble. I'm thinking if I'm in a cyberpunky dystopian city, I'm going to hear just that rumble of the atmosphere. And to me, this sound specifically just screams atmosphere, and it's kind of a nice bed and hum for the track. Now, all my samples here, I'm putting them in mono, and I am using things like reverb and delay. So this sample here, again, we're putting that in mono with the Bitwig tool. and then sending it through a little bit of a reverb here to put the sound out in the space. Quick call out here, if you guys are interested in how we actually made some of these ambient sounds, let me know down in the comments and I'd be happy to put out a video on how I actually created them. Now the next sound we have here is also from the Uncanny Dreams sample pack, and this is, to me, sounds like some type of futuristic vehicle driving by. And so the sample sounds like this. This we also have in mono, and we're panning it a little bit to the left and sending it through a delay. Now, there's some interesting things I'm doing here. If I pull open my automation panel, you'll see I'm automating the panning values here. And the goal with this is to really immerse that listener in the atmosphere. And so if I can slowly pan the sound of this light bike, I call it, I can make it sound like the bike is literally driving by the individual, right? So it starts on the far left and then drives by to the right, and you'll see we're kind of panning the sound throughout the song. So using automation and panning is such a great trick to really create that nice atmosphere that, you know, fully immerses that listener. Now, I did some other things with this sound here just to reuse the same sound. You'll see the first sample here, I'm playing it in its original direction. Then I created a copy and reversed the sound and pitched it up in the bottom right here, 1 semitone. So that creates some subtle variation in that single sample and allows you to just get some more use out of it in the song. Now, the next sound I have here is this one, Creature Sounds, that sounds like this. This one is interesting. It's super deep and rumbly, and I think for these dystopian type ambient songs, getting that, you know, hum similar to that craft bass sound really, again, just helps create this huge, big, brooding atmosphere. And so this sample here, we again have that folded down to mono, panned a little bit. And we're also sending that through a delay. Just an additional sound. Again, we're creating some brooding sense of dread with this sound, but also getting some more ear candy in there, right? It almost sounds like some weird cyberpunk crickets in the background. Now, the final sound we have here is what's called the Broken Machine. And this is an interesting one. So I have a sample here, and if I play the sample as it is, you'll hear it's just a piano sample. But what I did is added an arpeggiator on here. And so what happens when I hold one key is it's going to keep triggering the start of that sample. And to me, this created a really interesting pattern and sound that almost puts that user in a trance. And think walking by on the street, maybe you walk by like an air conditioner or some piece of machinery and it's broken, right? And so it's kind of just like dook, 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 right? Maybe trying to restart itself. And so I really love this sound, put this down into mono, panned it a little bit. And then what I did was automated the volume of this sound. Right, so it starts off pretty loud, it gets a little quiet, it gets loud again. So again, that's simulating, you know, walking through a city. You know, as you get further away from something, you know, the volume of it is going to become much less. So just some creative ways to approach that ambience, right? You always want to start off with some great samples, but, you know, thinking outside of the box, using the tools in your DAW, you know, things like panning and volume to really craft this picture of a scene. Now, if we go back to the beginning where I talked about that concept of a seamless loop as well, you know, if we assume this would be in the game, you know, if I come up with a 28 bar phrase here, can this loop perfectly and just be on repeat, assuming I'm going to be playing in this game world for an hour. And that's what I tried to create here. So all of this ambience, I could loop this for hours and it would fit in seamlessly. Now let's take a look at the music portion of this. So we have our ambience, which kind of acts as the bed and true ambience for this song we're making. But we want to introduce a little bit of subtle melody and musicality to this. So I think a pad is super crucial for this. And I have this pad and a sampler down here that's looped up. It sounds like this. This we have in mono, into a big delay, into a big reverb. And when we talk about pads, a lot of times pads are exactly what they sound like. They're there to pad the song out. So this is just filling up space, but is adding this nice subtle kind of droning, sustained pad sound here with a little bit of musicality to it. So when I hear this, I just kind of hear, I feel feelings of like hopelessness, right? Just this brooding, kind of sustained sound that doesn't really vary too much in pitch or tone. And so I think it's perfect for this type of track. This sample also came from my Uncanny Dream sample pack. I think I got this sample from a Emu Morpheus, if I recall. Just any of those old romplers are going to be able to do great sounds like this. Now, this next piece here is crucial for these types of songs. And if you go back and listen to, anything by these great composers from Deus Ex, Unreal Tournament, I think a standout aspect is an arpeggio. And my guess is going to be that these come from some type of virtual analog synth. A lot of times they just sound like saw waves, triangle waves with some basic processing. But I wanted to get this arpeggio in, and so I sampled a note from A Chord Prophecy. And then I turned on an arpeggio for that note. I set the bass rate to 1/8 and then messed around with the gate a little bit down here. And then I'm running this sampler through a chord. And so the arpeggio, once we put everything in mono and send it through a delay, sounds like this. And again, this to me is just reeks early 2000s Unreal Tournament, Deus Ex. You gotta have that arpeggio in there. And so I'm also automating the volume of this. We're repeating that arpeggio through this entire lick. And I don't want it super loud. I don't want it to be in your face. So I use that automation to keep it very subtle and almost create this effect that, the sound is kind of rising and falling and poking its head out of the ambience. Last thing we have down here is another sample from the Chord Prophecy. It sounds like this. I have this in mono going through a delay as well. And this is just simply playing a few notes in the song, right? And these notes, they're spaced out pretty largely. So every now and then in the tune, we get this little single note hit that then goes through a big delay. And these two notes that kind of come in, again, spaced out very well, I think just really help add to the sense of melancholy and dread into the song. So that's why I threw these in, and then that's it for the musical side of things. So you'll see, if we expand both of these, I'll get back to what I talked about in the beginning. Really what we have here is just this bed of atmosphere and a little bit of musicality to it. We put these things together, we create a seamless loop, and that's how we ended up with the song. Now let's take a look on the processing side of things. You'll remember in the beginning I talked about how a lot of these samples have that 8-bit, 12-bit mono sound. And what I'm using to emulate that is a VST called Decimort 2. And Decimort 2 has a lot of these sampler DAC presets. And so the one I'm using here is the Paula preset, which I believe comes from the Amiga sampler DACs. And this, I did modify a little. I raised the bit rate up to 12 from 8 and did mess with the frequency a little bit. It was a little too grungy, but something like this is an easy way to get that old school sampler sound. So if I play through the song without it. So that's a great tool to use, and by just throwing it on your master bus, you don't have to mess with, treating each track or sample as is. A couple other good programs to achieve something similar are DAC here, which is pretty affordable and does a similar thing. So you can emulate old sampler DACs from the Amiga, Acais, and Emus. Something like this, Decimort DAC is going to have you well on your way to recreate this sound.